So y'all can sit here and ask me all the questions y'all want to.
Don't you ever talk about
Man, let's go. It's go time, baby.
I'm just about that action, boss.
You ready to go get it. You just like to do it.
That's what it is.
Defense trying to do that. Pass is caught back in. Can't chase it. What a catch! Jackson Smith and
Are you kidding me?
Baldwin. Oh my goodness, he caught it.
This is the HawksZone Rundown with your hosts, Ryan and Bryce.
All right, I just want to welcome in Curtis Allen, who is joining us, salary cap expert and writer over with Rob Staten on the Seahawks draft blog. Curtis, haven't had you on for a while. How was the offseason? How have you enjoyed some of this time off that everyone's kind of had over this time period and dealing with this little bit of a lull right now that's going on before training camp starts in a few weeks? So, Curtis, what's going on?
Yeah, thanks for having me on again, Bryce. I love your guys' show. Appreciate that. I think it's been a very great offseason. I think they've had a lot of success looking at how the team is modeled and rostered and made some very definitive changes. I tend to lean toward more aggressive structuring in the offseason with the salary cap, with your roster, and not waiting and seeing how things work out as the Pete Carroll model has done in the past. So this is a little bit more to my taste as far as making these moves. It was clear that players like Geno Smith, DK Metcalf, were not completely content here in Seattle. And, whatever it is, I don't know the gossip of really what happened, whether they just weren't happy with the money, whether it was the opportunity. I feel like Geno Smith probably wanted to go to Las Vegas as soon as Pete Carroll was named the head coach. And that worked out better for him. But for whatever reasons, they had some major challenges with their big name players, and they made quick decisions. And in my opinion, they made effective decisions rather than trying to either hang on and try and change people's minds, get things working in the right direction, or trading them and then just saying, well, let's just see what's out there and we'll see what comes to us. They made very, very aggressive moves. So they traded Geno Smith. A couple of days later, they had signed Sam Darnold, arguably the best quarterback on the free agent market. They were moving forward. They picked up Cooper Kupp, and they were very aggressive. And it actually traces back to last year when they moved off of the two linebackers, Baker and Dodson, fairly quickly. I don't think that would have happened on a Pete Carroll team, but they made moves that were strong and decisive, and then they went and addressed the guard situation on the offensive line with the very first pick in the draft. I think that might have been the most obvious pick in recent Seahawks memory as far as who in general the fandom were waiting for them to pick at 18. And it was very obvious. So it was straightforward, and they went through with it. And then they were able to get a couple of guys in the second round who were very strong, but had some questions. So there was a level of aggression that I enjoyed.
Yeah, no, it was definitely an interesting offseason. It was very different to what we are accustomed to as Seahawks fans, I think, in a lot of ways, because like you said, it was very direct. And in some of those respects, I think that's due to Mike McDonald and the Baltimore mindset he comes from now. And you saw them move off from players. You don't want to be here, you're gone. I'm not going to beg you to be here. I'm not going to bend over backwards for you to be here. And that's, I think, things that Pete did well. I'm never going to take that away from Pete because he was able to get guys like Bobby Wagner to come back after a year of, a bad breakup. He had players like Richard Sherman and that be around the team. That was Pete's whole thing. You look at when Pete left Seattle that night, how many players that had gone separate ways at certain points flew back in to see Pete at his quasi going away retirement-esque party to the point where Russell Wilson and Richard Sherman were in the same room. So it's definitely different. And the thing for me, and, a lot of people, I think, when you look at this offseason, like I was okay with the moves of DK. I understood it. Geno's move, I understood, and I don't think Geno's move necessarily happens unless Pete Carroll's back in the NFL. I think that was a huge, huge component to that. The Tyler move, I understood. It was time. I'm just surprised Tyler didn't end up, honestly, in Vegas. But But then the thing that, like you said, they go get Cooper Kupp, they go get Sam Darnold. They made additions, and I think the biggest additions, to be brutally honest with you, is in this offensive coaching staff. You're bringing in over 45 years worth of experience in offensive line play in a certain scheme that has worked in the NFL, that is a huge component to offense now in the NFL in this West Coast outside zone scheme. And you went and got players that fit the scheme. And the thing for me, then you look at the draft, they go out and get Gray Zabel. Now, I know there were a lot of people that they needed to do more in free agency for the offensive line. It was a very bad free agency offensive line class. They went after Will Fries. They actually went after and tried to get a guy, and it was all came down to the medical is why they didn't. And I wonder how many Seahawks fans would be annoyed if they gave Will Fries that massive contract, and we're talking about a guy that struggled to stay healthy, that struggled to be on the field at different points, because we don't know what that's going to look like yet in Minnesota. He may never play a full season. We don't know. He's coming off a pretty significant leg injury.
Yeah.
And then there weren't really many guys after that. Everyone says about Drew Dahlman. Drew Dahlman was set on going to Ben Johnson in Chicago. That was, and I've talked to numerous people that were well connected. There wasn't another team in that bidding. He was going. It didn't matter what money you threw at him. He wanted to be in Chicago. And so then when you talk about, those two guys are off the board, then we're talking about, Jenkins, and we're talking about other guys. And I went, are they really better necessarily than what we have and drafted in last year even? And Christian Haynes and some of these guys? I didn't think so. I think you need to see some of these guys in a proper NFL coach scheme like you will see this year with Clint Kubiak and Rick Dennison and John Benton. So overall, I'm actually quite happy with Seattle's offseason. They're if it fails, you're failing differently. You're not failing with the same recipe. You're trying to add different things to the recipe to try and enhance it and push it over that bar, which is something that never really occurred much in the later years of the Pete Carroll era. But it's kind of a relief that it's now happening again with Mike McDonald and John Schneider.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's definitely a fresh feeling to the way they're approaching things. With the offensive line, I think we all need to understand better and grasp a little bit better, myself included, that there are other ways to invest in the offensive line. There's money in free agency, there's high draft picks, but there's also the coaching staff, the medical staff, how things work out that way. And John Schneider, if you listen closely, he'll tell you what he's thinking and what he wants to do. He was preaching before free agency even started that we need coaching, we need consistent development, and guys are just so expensive these days that even mediocre players are getting a big chunk of money. And so what's happening is, would you spend $19 million a year on like an Aaron Banks, like the Packers did, or could you spend some money developing players that are maybe an Anthony Bradford type player that are maybe still on their rookie contract, and he'll be fairly inexpensive if they want to extend him, that kind of thing. So there's definitely a strategy to what they're doing. It's been thought out and planned, and it feels like that has been done more so this year than in any other previous year. So the way they're approaching the offensive line is not just to get players, it's to develop an offense, bring in coaches that are tried and true, consistently tested, and have been around where they've walked into a room where they've never worked with this group of offensive linemen before, and turn it into something that's pretty decent. So I think I agree with you. There's definitely a level of trying different solutions and looking at ways that they can really move forward with the offense to even be just adequate on the offensive line. They don't need to be superstars, but just adequacy would be a great goal to have.
So it's actually a really great point that we started finishing that conversation with the offensive line, because two of those cornerstones of this offensive line that we're hoping will take that jump are up to be free agents potentially next year in the 2026 free agency class one of them has a 5th-year option, and we're talking about Charles Cross and Abe Lucas. And so, you look at that 2022 draft class, And that was one of the few draft classes I saw the change start happening. You get Charles Cross with pick 9, and you started to see some of the impact of it. Where would you say, in comparison, in your opinion, Curtis, that draft class ranks amongst the last 3 years for Seattle? And, is it the second best one, the first? Where does it sit with you with the players that came out? We're talking about Tariq Woolen, Kenneth Walker, Abe Lucas, Kobe Bryant, Charles Cross, Boye Mafe. Where does that group, considering how much those guys are basically, a lot of them are starters on this group now of the Seattle Seahawks?
Yeah, I think it was a very good class, especially when you consider that perhaps the top end of that 2022 draft was not a really great draft. It was not known as a draft that was going to produce super duper franchise players in the top 5 or top 10. But picking with what they did and having the players that they've been able to develop is great. So I think there's a lot of good value there for them. The only thing is, as far as, it's just not like the 2012 draft there, where there's a franchise quarterback and a franchise middle linebacker coming out of that draft. There's good players, but teams, how do I say this nicely? Teams go down paying for good players instead of great players and then developing underneath them good players. So they're going to have an interesting, every player in the 2022 class that's up for a contract, they have a question on how, are they good enough for that second contract in Seattle, or are they going to let somebody else pay them in the market?
So that's actually a really, kind of interesting way to segue into part of this, topic here. And what we've got is who to pay. Like, who out of this group? You have essentially 6 starters out of this group that you're going to have to make decisions on, potentially even through this training camp and next year in the offseason. So of that group, for you, who are the, who are the guys that stand out that you would say they need to be looked at as more long-term options for Seattle? How many, for one, and who are they?
Yeah, I definitely feel like the offensive line is the first question that you have to look at. Charles Cross on left and Abe Lucas on the right. I think adding the 5th-year option with Charles Cross was a very smart move. It was the first guy that they've actually tagged with that 5th-year option. And there's a little bit of a play there with value, because the way the 5th-year option works is you get raises or graduates if you go to Pro Bowls. So, for instance, some of the players in the center in Philly that I'm blanking on right now, his 5th-year option would have been $24 million and completely blown up the center market. Well, Cross did not make any Pro Bowls, and so his is $17 million. Now, that's still a lot of money, but some of these guys that got money on the market, like Dan Moore, got a bunch of money from Tennessee, and the Jalen Moore from Kansas City got a bunch of money, even though just a handful of starts, 5th-round pick. Dan Moore, let's be honest, not much to write home about, just a starter for a lot of years. So it buys them a little bit of time, but it's also good value to see where they are with Charles Cross. And I feel like with him, they might wait and see how he does this year. If he takes that next step, in 2024, he had a very good year PFF wise, grading for him. So it'll be very interesting to see if he'll build off of that. And the one thing with Cross that is all it needs to be a consideration is he's so young. He's a young player to be going into his 4th NFL season. So there may be another development coming, and will be there for them. So I don't know that they'll immediately extend him this year, because they have this year and next year to make that happen. So they may try, if there's a good value play there, they might do it, but we'll see. I think Abe Lucas is going to be interesting. How do they feel about his health? And that's something they'll never tell anybody. How do they really feel about his health? We won't know about that until they either sign him to a contract extension or let him go. that sort of thing. So, but there's opportunity there to maybe this year see how he does through the summer, through camp, and then maybe 2, 3, 4 weeks or months into the season, see where he is, and then hey, ring his agent up, and maybe in November, December, talk to him and just say, hey, we love what you're doing, we feel good about it, and let's put a contract on the table. So Miami did that with Austin Jackson a couple years ago. He missed almost the whole year, had a bad ankle injury, came back, rehab, played very well, and then they immediately snapped him up. It was like 3 years, 36 million, something like that. So if there's value there, I wouldn't be opposed at all to taking that shot. And they'd have to really, really rely on their medicals, though, because we've had such weird information flow from Abe Lucas and the team over the last couple of years. So I think those two are the kind of the primary targets. I think the rest, I don't want to say they're replaceable, but there's opportunities there if they want to, save some money or move on. Boye Mafe, they have some depth in the pass rushing spot. Ken Walker, obviously, they have running back depth. Tariq Woolen is kind of an enigma to me. It's a very challenging situation that I don't think anybody can honestly say, I know what his value is and what he'll get on the open market at this moment in time. So I wouldn't be opposed to letting that play out and then seeing where they're at after the season is over.
So it's really interesting. You talked about Lucas and Cross there as guys that probably are your guys you want to focus on. And we're talking about who to pay here. And the thing for me is, like, who would you say out of this group or out of this draft class is probably the biggest disappointment that you're like, the decision on paying them is going to be more challenging, even if they have a good year? And for me, it's honestly, it's Abe Lucas. And I know it sounds crazy to everybody because when he does play, he's such a factor. But you're banking on, on an offensive lineman that had, as we believe now, a bad leg. And that's kind of a worrisome thing for me when you're talking about potentially, what does that extension look like with Abe Lucas? So he's the one for me that I wouldn't say he's a disappointment, but it was just, he had such promise his rookie year, and then we've only seen him sporadically. So this year I think is a huge component for it. But moving on to something a little bit with this, let's kind of do like a player by player breakdown. I know we kind of got into it a little bit there, but when we talk about, let's get into the salary cap of what a contract would look like for these guys. So when we're talking about Charles Cross, does he really justify potentially that $20 million a year range, like players like Laramie Tunsil or Trent Williams? Like, is he in that echelon are we talking about, or is he in a market below? And what does that 2026 potentially offensive tackle, market even look like if Seattle were to potentially consider the idea of, if Luke or Cross has a down year, of, we have the 5th-year option, but we need to start looking, whether it's in the draft, whether even maybe it is in free agency, to start hedging ourselves. What do you think his contract would look like first off? And then what do you think, Seattle ends up doing potentially?
Yeah, I think Dan Moore got $20 million a year from Tennessee, and you have to kind of feel your way through that to understand if that was a market contract or whether that was Tennessee paying the Tennessee tax and just saying, hey, we're going to draft a number 1 quarterback. We've got to have a left tackle that's at least a body that's there, for lack of a better term. And I'm not trying to dump on Dan Moore, but his PFF grade's not great. He was one of the leading sack giver-uppers last year in the NFL. So it's a very challenging situation to see where Charles Cross might be at. But it might be a situation where if they want to talk to him now and just offer him, say, a 3-year deal that's in the range of $17 to $19 million annually, he might have a chance to get back into the market at like 28 years old. And then just if he's gets to that next level that we're hoping for, he'll be able to really cash in. I mean, by that time, it'll be probably $40 million a year for a solid left tackle at that point. So there's opportunities there if they feel like his value is really somewhere in that range that they can go to, and he's on a track. He's gotten the okay from the new coaching staff and feeling how they feel with it. I wouldn't be surprised if they tried to kind of get ahead of the market and extend him. So, and you're right. I think about Abe Lucas. You know what? I put out a tweet this year that it seems like this year the Seahawks are relying more on their medical staff than they ever have before, because you've got DeMarcus Lawrence, Cooper Kupp, Abe Lucas. You've got a bunch of players. Will Fries, they didn't want to look at him without some medical. So they've made a lot of decisions this year. A couple of guys they drafted were banged up pretty bad. So a lot of decisions they made this year were with medical knowledge that we don't know about yet. And so it's really going to be interesting to see how they move with that and what decisions they make.
So let's move to another player in this draft class, Boye Mafe. So, he's there was the term used at one point, fantastic rise. He's turning into a well-rounded linebacker. When you look at his contract, a guy, similar build, skill set, Rashawn Gary out of Green Bay, he's in that $15 to $18 million a year range. Do you see Boye Mafe's value being that? And do you see Seattle paying that value? Or do you see Seattle potentially moving on, considering they, like you said, they do have some depth, but they don't have a lot of young depth. They've got Derek Hall. You have two aging players, really, in DeMarcus Lawrence and Chenna Nwosu, both who have their own injury histories, as we've talked about. And, where do you think Seattle goes in the direction of Boye Mafe? Is it likely they would pay something like that for him? And what would you say that contract looks like term-wise and value?
Well, it's going to be, I think 2025 is going to be a proving ground for a lot of the players in this class. Boye Mafe has been a very good player at times, but he's been inconsistent. So if you look at his game-by-game stats, there'll be games where he just kind of disappears off the stat chart. There's no sacks, there's no pressures, there's not a whole lot going on there. And like last year, not last year, the year before, he had that great sack streak. When the sack per game broke, when he broke that streak, it stopped. He disappeared for like 5 weeks. And you can't pay a player premium money for that kind of play. So, and Mike McDonald has said several times, if you listen to him, they want Boye Mafe to be a 3-down player. So they're still waiting for him to kind of fully blossom into that. You can't take him off the field to make a better scheme adjustment. He's got to have a player that he can be on the field all 3 downs, and he can be consistent. So what's happening is you'll find players that get 7 or 8 or 9 sacks, but they don't get a ton of money in the market, kind of like Benson Mayowa, if you remember. He just don't get a lot of money because they get, I don't want to say they get empty sacks, but they get sacks and then they disappear for a few games, and then they get a couple of sacks and they're not around, and they don't contribute to that on the game presence where, okay, you've got to account for him on every single snap and know where he is and what's happening. So there's a wide gap between that, and the Seahawks would be really smart to kind of, in my opinion, wait on Boye Mafe, see where he goes, and see if he develops into a further rounded player. So like Greg Rousseau in Buffalo, they extended him 4 years, $80 million. He got $20 million a year. And if you look at his stats, they're almost identical to Boye Mafe's the first 3 seasons. So that's something his agent will love to point to for sure. But I can't see the Seahawks spending that kind of money unless he makes a big leap in effectiveness this year.
I found myself this past season, and this is just my view of watching that defense. I found myself going, oh, there's Derek Hall again, or oh, there's Derek Hall again. And I found myself being more like finding my eyes going to seeing Derek Hall being more impactful than Boye Mafe. And we're talking about a guy that's still got 2 years left theoretically on his deal in Derek Hall, as he's not up till 2020, end of 2026. for his start of 2027, he'll be a free agent. But so that's where, for me, I agree with you. I think the Seattle Seahawks will wait on Mafe. I'm scared of giving him somewhere around that 20 million per year, because I agree, and I've noticed the same thing in the way Mike McDonald talks about him, that they want him to be that 3-down player, but he hasn't emerged into that. And I think that's also it signals a little bit too with the DeMarcus Lawrence signing, that they're bringing that type of player in going into this year. So it'll be interesting. Now, the next player on this list is Tariq Woolen, and I'm going to tie this in afterwards between Tariq and Mafe. But when you look at Tariq Woolen, we talk about Lenore and Stingley got their big contract extensions the past 2 off seasons. What is your take on Woolen? Because I look at him and I go, Devin Witherspoon is going to be due. Now you get the 5th-year option with Devin Witherspoon, but Devin Witherspoon is truly a weapon on defense. You move him inside, outside, he can do it all. Are they going to be able to, on this, with the amount of salary cap space that they will have, are they going to be able to pay 2 top corners in their mind? And do you think Tariq Woolen is somebody that Seattle is going to invest long-term money in going forward? Or do you think, again, it's similar to Mafe, 2025 is super crucial for Tariq Woolen?
I think the 2025 is going to be a really serious year for him. When you listen to Mike McDonald and him talking on the subject of the cornerbacks, if you kind of have to listen subtly, but occasionally he'll be talking about, like, when they signed Josh Jobe, he's like, yeah, Josh Jobe and Witherspoon work well together, and they've got this chemistry, and they're the guys that we're really talking about on our team. And oh yeah, we've got Tariq Woolen on the other side that we really like too. And it kind of there's a little giveaway that they're not really sold on Tariq Woolen. I think he's got the best way to put it is he's got all the tools. He just didn't out of the toolbox yet to put it all together and make sure that he's consistently there every week. The first time he came into training camp, I was very impressed and, in fact, blown away by how willing he was to come down on the edge and set the edge in like a run blocking situation. He had no fear to come down. And if you wanted to get rough with him, that he had no problem with that. And so it's there. It's inside of him to be a good tackler, to be a good physical presence, and to have those battles with those big, strong wide receivers on that side. But consistently, can he do it? Are there moments where he has lapses and tries to make it up with his incredible talent? Yeah, there are. So I feel like Mike McDonald hasn't settled on him as, okay, this guy, we're gonna take him, we're gonna pay him, he's gonna play on that right side, he's gonna take away half the field, and that'll allow us to focus on all of the fun stuff that we want to do on the other side of the field with all of the versatility and all the cool scheming that they've got in mind. I will say this, I'm not trying to start a fire, but in my mind, when they signed Shaq Griffin, his time in Seattle, his entire time in Seattle was on the left side of the cornerback spot. Last couple of years, he's had to rotate around and be on the right side cornerback spot. So I feel like there's a little bit more that maybe hasn't been talked about, that he may be able, if Woolen were to get hurt, or if there were to be, some player that they can't live without popping free, like Trey Hendrickson, something like that, in a trade, could they live with Griffin on the right side for a season and then further develop a little bit later, especially with crazy pass? Yes, they could. But so in my mind, when they signed Griffin, yes, he's on the left side. He'll be over there. That's what he's always done. But the last couple of years, he's been very versatile. So I believe there's a bit of a hedge there if they feel like there's moments with Woolen that he's not cut out for this team, or like when Pete Carroll had to bench him, that was tough watching that happen. And then the Seahawks getting kind of burned because he got benched at times with the players they brought in. So yeah, I fully agree that this is probably like Boye Mafe. He needs to take that next step and earn that big contract. It's not a contract where you're buying ahead. It's, we've got to see more from you before we sign on the dotted line.
Yeah, that's kind of how I feel with Reek. Like I love when Reek's on, he's phenomenal. But when Reek's not on, Reek can be really bad. And that's how I'm going to be very interested to see, like, when, I'm there for training camp at different points and watching that, group and seeing how does Reek, perform, because as much as I think Griffin's here to really be the third corner with Witherspoon and Woolen this year, I really think Griffin could, like you said, if something popped up, like a really opportunity to go get Trey Hendrickson, and Seattle needs to add a piece, and that piece could be Reek Woolen, I don't think Seattle would balk at the idea of getting rid of Reek Woolen to add an impact player like, Trey Hendrickson. I don't think it necessarily even makes their defense, it hurts them, but I don't know to what extent it does. So that'll be an interesting one to see, out of these extension, potential guys. The next one on this list is Ken Walker, K9, and he is a bipolar player on the offensive side. Reek's kind of that on the defensive side out of this group.
Yeah.
K9's the guy on offense. And, you listen to Clint Kubiak talk this offseason, you can tell his enthusiasm for what Ken Walker brings and how he wants to use him in his scheme, very probably similar to what he did with Alvin Kamara. But there's the injury concerns with Kenneth Walker. And I know a lot of people say, well, he's been hit so much because the O-line's been so bad. Yes, but running backs in general get hit. That is their job, carrying the rock. Right. You can't be like, oh, he got hit so much. Well, yeah, but he would have got hit on the same play necessarily if, he had gotten through and the guy hadn't hit him right in the backfield. He would have hit him 5 yards downfield. So it's one of those things for me when I look at Kenneth Walker, I go, the injury situation and the durability is really what I think drives the contract discussions between Seattle and his camp. And I think it was very interesting the back that they chose this year in the draft in Damian Martinez, who is a more explosive, in my opinion, power back type like Charbonnet, but I think he's a better athlete than Charbonnet in a lot of respects. I think there's a chance they really fall in love with Damian Martinez. And, it could make K9 someone that's expendable. What is your take on K9?
Yeah, I agree thoroughly with what you're saying. I feel like he's the running back that presents something that the other guys don't. He has that explosiveness. He has the speed. I'm not saying Charbonnet and McIntosh and Damian Martinez are slow by any stretch of the imagination, but that extra burst to turn a 6-yard run into a 46-yard run is critical. And I've seen in camp, I've seen him running routes. Like he's literally split out on a route and had a safety on him and handily beaten that safety running a route. So I feel like Walker's been underutilized in a sense. Probably some of that is because he's been hurt. So not necessarily incompetence by the staff or anything like that. So he brings an element that the other guys don't have, and it's tantalizing. So how far do you go with that is really the question. I may be in the minority, but right now I'd talk to him and just say, hey, how about a 2-year, $20 million extension right now? So, I mean, that puts him maybe the top 12 of the NFL in pay. And if he performs, he's a top 12 player when he's healthy, easily. So if they feel like, he's really ready to take that next step and they want him to be a guy that can, Sam Darnold's in trouble, he dumps it off to him and he takes it for 7 or 8 or 9 yards and burns the defense. There could be a room for him there. And again, it's the same thing. You don't want to extend running backs for 6 years and $60 million or anything like that because of the injury situation. But a 2-year contract gets him back to free agency at, say, 28 years old or so, where he can have another crack if he does really good at it. But a 2-year 20, really, I mean, that's the extension, that's security for his family. And that might be a worthy thing to see if they feel like he's ready to take that next step. And then you've got money to spend on other positions the next couple of years because you've been smart now with your running backs.
Yeah, I agree. Like when K9's on, I love him. Like I love what he brings to the offense. I think he could really work in this outside zone because of the cutback opportunities. And like you said, We saw it in that Chargers game his rookie year. You give him a toss and he takes it 70 yards down the sideline to seal the game.
Yep.
Those are things that the other backs don't offer you. I think it'll be really interesting to see how he does through training camp, how much they use him even in the preseason. I predict it'll be like a series or two in game 2, and that'll be it for him.
Yeah.
But let's get to these last 2 guys on this, because we're not going to talk about the entire class, because there's some guys that are not probably going to be here. But Abe Lucas and Kobe Bryant, to me, are 2 very interesting players. You've got, obviously, we talked about a little bit earlier with Abe with his knee and stuff like that. What do you see as a contract for Abe Lucas being a right tackle and coming off the amount of injury-plagued seasons he's had? Even if he has a healthy one this year, what do you think that could look like? And then on the other side, Kobe Bryant, who's finally now moved into what seems like his permanent position in safety. How do you view Kobe Bryant's future in Seattle due to the draft pick of Nick Emenwari? Do you think that hurts Kobe's chances of getting an extension, or do you think Mike McDonald views Kobe Bryant as an integral part of his defense?
As far as Abe Lucas goes, that Austin Jackson contract was 3 years, $36 million. There's not a ton of guarantee security in it. So it would be a play that they try to give him some money, maybe with inflation, 3 years, 45, 3 years, 50, somewhere in that range, if they want to do it. Maybe 2 years, 30, something like that. Okay, here's a couple of years. We're going to, just see how it goes. We want less security because of your injury situation, and see how you play. You get back in the market, and it could be a very good, astute play there for the Seahawks. But of course, it depends on, like I said, their medicals, and that's what we don't know, how they feel about his long-term potential. I don't have any questions about his skill level and what he can bring to the offense, because when it comes time to talk about running the ball with authority and physicality, honestly, the one that I think about on that offense is Abe Lucas. And Gray's Abel will help now that he's here, but he's a rookie. So Lucas, maybe a short-term deal that gives the Seahawks some flexibility and some outs. Kobe Bryant is very fascinating to me, because they did not give him the job last year very much. He did not play very much until Rayshon Jenkins got hurt. They really liked Rayshon Jenkins. He didn't play well with the Seahawks, and it's hard to say, but it's almost like a gift that he got hurt, because when he came in and they traded for Ernest Jones at the same time, so they traded for Ernest Jones and Kobe Bryant took over that safety spot, the defense just snapped. Everything just kind of clicked into place, and they played very well. And he has a nose for the ball that you can't develop. You can't coach that into a guy. He just has it, whether it's the interceptions, being in the right place at the right time, punching the ball out. He's a physical tackler. He has no problem tackling in the run game, and that makes him a good player. But the market is kind of difficult for safety. So like a 3-year, $20 million contract, that's what a lot of these sort of third safety guys get on these kind of teams. And so it might be another opportunity to buy low if they feel like he's going to take that next step, and he's going to be a guy that's a turnover creator for the Seahawks, because you can't put a price on that, really, if he's out there punching the ball away or taking interceptions and doing things like that. But it depends on what their plans are for Nick Emenwari for this year and then for next year as well, I think. So we'll see how that goes. But I think he'd be a sneaky good signing if they could get him for like a 3-year deal in the $15 to $20 million range. But it would have to be soon. It would have to be this year that they'd nail that down. So do they have Nick Styles to have Nick Emenwari eventually take his job over, and then they'd find another safety somewhere that they could plug in? Because safeties are cheap, honestly. They're cornerbacks who they have skills, but they just can't translate to the NFL. They still have skills, and they can move over to safety. So you've got to save some money somewhere. You can't pay everybody $20 million a year and get away with that and build a good team. So there's going to be a determination they're going to have to make, and especially with trading up for Nick Emenwari, there's an investment there between him and Love, Julian Love. How much are they going to pour into that resource? And honestly, between you and me, they've seen the results of pouring too much resources into the safety position the last few years. So it can be a challenge. They're going to have to really, really be sharp on that one. And if Kobe really wants to stay and have a job and have some security, or if he wants to go out and play the market. So that'll be the way that falls.
So the Abe Lucas thing, I totally agree with you. Like, I think that the Austin Jackson kind of framework for a deal makes sense, especially if Abe has a good year this year. Kobe, for me, it's really hard because I love Kobe Bryant. I've loved him since they drafted him. I was very, very much in the camp he needed to move to safety his rookie year, even when they played him at nickel. I was like, he needs to be a safety at the NFL level. He's too smart and he's not athletically gifted enough to play that outside corner in the NFL level. When they finally moved him there in year 2, and then he got injured, and then it was like Pete forgot about him, forgot he even existed in a lot of ways. And Pete was very much in love with the Jamal Adams and the Quandre Diggs and so on. I really look at Kobe Bryant and I kind of go, I would almost, if I was Seattle, there's 2 players for me, and this is something I'll get your, thoughts on quickly here, but there's 2 players out of this entire group that we've talked on for priority wise. So we'll talk about the priorities here. I think Kobe Bryant, if I was ranking the 6 of them, it goes Charles Cross 1. I think you get Abe Lucas 2. I think Kobe Bryant is 3. I think Ken Walker is probably 4. I think Boye Mafe is 4B. Reek is your 5th guy really in that group I look at. So, that's kind of how I look at this because, I get the Boye Mafe thing and people are going to go, well, he's a young pass rusher. But he hasn't hit yet. And how you got another young one in Derek Hall. And I think edge is going to be something that Seattle's going to look at in the draft next year as one of their areas. They say we have to get younger because you're relying on a breaking down Chenna Nwosu potentially, DeMarcus Lawrence. You've got Jared Ivey and Connor O'Toole in camp this year, but you don't know what those undrafted free agents are going to do. I have high hopes for Ivey. Where does your priority ranking go there, Curtis? Is it similar to mine, or is I'm completely out in left field all on my own?
No, I think that's I'm in the same ballpark. Maybe a couple of positions here and there different. Charles Cross, I feel like he'll have to take a step forward in order to be that big of a priority. It's a challenge to see because, like for instance, Russell Okung was here in Seattle. Does anyone rank Russell Okung as one of the top 15, top 10 left tackles in the NFL at that time? No, but he got a big second contract or third contract, with other on the free agent market because he was such a long starter. He was a high draft pick and he was, I hate saying this, but he was there, for a lot of years. He just started, he was there. He didn't run anybody over or be a dominant player. And I feel like Charles Cross at the moment is kind of on that track. He'll retire with a really handsome bank account, but will he be a player that really takes the Seahawks to the next level? The old adage of, okay, we need a yard, let's run behind Charles Cross, or it's 3rd and 1 or 3rd and 5, and the best edge defender in the NFL is lining up over left tackle. No problem. We've got it. He's got him. That sort of thing. So you get into that trap of paying too much money for good players and not enough, and not focusing on making, paying for great players and then making those painfully tough decisions over the years. But no, I agree that Charles and Lucas, like I said, were probably right up there at the top. I think Kobe Bryant could be a player that is one of those guys that just fits this defense with his versatility, with his like the ball skills that he has. And there's guys like Emenwari that can fit all over the field. And then there's a second level down of like Kobe Bryant, who can fit in and make Nick Immanwori play really well because he's got it deep. Okay, he's covered deep. He's got it. No problem. You can send Nick Immanwori up to the line and have him rush the passer. Or you can have him in the nickel and you can have Witherspoon blitzing. So you can have all kinds of stuff happening there. And on an investment level, it could be a really astute investment if they get him on a deal like for 3 years. But yeah, I'm with you with Ken Walker, Boye Mafe, and Woolen. They just all have question marks, and they all have great skill that we really, really need on our team on the Seahawks. But you just have to make a calculation with some guys that, will they ever live up to that top end potential and stay on the field, whether it's being healthy or whether it's, attitude issues or practice issues? Are they the guys to take it to that next level? And there may be a situation where they offer them a contract that's lower than the market, and they may feel like, yeah, it's a good time to take it, cash in, stay with the Seahawks, be successful. Or they may feel, no, I want to go explore the market. Like Gino, I've always wanted to play for Pete Carroll. I want to go to Las Vegas, or I want to go home to Carolina, or here or there, or Texas, or something like that. So it'll be very interesting to see how it plays out. But no, I agree with your structure of where you're at. The two linemen, I like Kobe Bryant, and then seeing where the rest of the young players fall as far as their performance this year. Can they step up and just be like, you're the guy. We need to count on you. We're counting on you. Do it. Do a job.
So the last part I'll ask you here before we kind of get on to what you're looking forward to in training camp, because I know you'll be there.
Mm-hmm.
What does Seattle's 2026 cap look like? If, basically going into it as of currently right now, how much wiggle room would they have if, say, they signed 3 of these guys to the deals that you kind of spoke of? How much wiggle room will they have to still add to this team through free agency? And how much will it affect what they can do with obviously the class after that, which will be the 2023 draft class, which has Derek Hall, Charbonnet, and some of these other guys involved in it?
I think they're in great shape. Next year, they have something like $55 million, according to Over the Cap. They're at $30 million this year, so they could roll that over into next year if they wanted to. And when you sign players, the way you structure it, usually the first couple of years aren't that expensive. So you could really make it so you have some room there to pay the players that you want to. They could, in theory, pay all 5 or 6 of those guys if they wanted to. I don't think they will. I think, like we talked about, they'll make a determination, and they'll assign who they need to sign. But there's no way that all of them stay here in Seattle unless there's something really, really off the wall happening. So they could do that. They'll have room to operate in free agency if they want to. One of the things that I really enjoyed about this offseason is, so Geno Smith probably would have been $38-40 million a year to keep him here over moving him to Las Vegas. So there's a lot of money there. The DK Metcalf contract in Pittsburgh, there's a lot of money in that contract that he's gonna be paid. And so when you trade those guys, you open up cap room, but you eat dead cap. But in 26, 27, 28, you don't have those large contracts that are going to really hurt. You're going to be like, how are we going to build our team around these guys that are making such huge salaries? So they have a lot of flexibility, and they've started to use this year. They've started to use some of the commoner things that other NFL teams use, like void years. Sam Darnold, they do have a 1-year commitment to him. They truly do. It's 1 year, and then they've got an out a few days after the Super Bowl with his roster bonus and some guaranteed salary. So Sam Darnold gets hurt, is ineffective. They can move forward with Drew Lock and Jalen Milroe if they feel like in 2026. I'm not saying that's going to happen. I do not want that to happen necessarily, but I'm saying that that is an option there. So there could be a whole bunch of money off the books if that seems to happen. Now, I would love that Sam Darnold is lights out and puts a whole bunch of money on their books and is really great. But no, they have a lot of flexibility. They can do a lot of different things in the next couple of years with how they perceive this class, the market, and what's out there. There's some things though that just don't have a market, like a left tackle. It's there. Oh yeah, we'll just go get a great left tackle out in the market. You can't do that. Really, you have to build your team through good drafting and extensions that are astute and beneficial for both the player and the team. You can't buy a championship. You just can't. Last year's number one spender in free agency, Tennessee Titans, and they have the number one pick in the draft. And they went and brought in a whole bunch more players, like they gave Dan Moore $80 million, sort of thing. So it's not an easy, quick pathway to success. But extending your players that you've really decided are players you want to keep around is a very good strategy, and it's astute if you can make it work for you and afford some other players, which I think they can do.
Just that conversation right there spurred another question for me here for you, Curtis. What has it been like for you? Obviously, you've studied the Seahawks cap, and you're very much into that, and it's something that's kind of your wheelhouse. What has it been like to see the difference from Matt Thomas to Joey Lane now in construction of Seattle's salary cap?
Yeah, I think it's been a big difference. The first year he came in, it was April of 2024, if I remember right. So they'd already done a good chunk of their free agency. So we really couldn't get a good idea of what his values were, how he was going to counsel and advise John Schneider. But there's been a little bit more aggression. There's been a little bit more moving forward with players. Like if they move forward with players, they're finding ways to make sure that happens. So they're not afraid to, like, for instance, when they were talking in the offseason, I'm sure one of their meetings included, if we offload DK Metcalf, there's $20 million of dead cap. If we offload Geno Smith, there's a bunch of dead cap. And so they've been a really high dead cap hit team this year. And that's bad. It's not something to be proud of necessarily, but there's teams that have taken the dead cap, they bit the bullet, and they've basically been able to rebuild fairly quickly. So you think about it, it's either having Geno Smith and DK Metcalf or trading those guys, getting $31 million of free cap room from Geno Smith and something along the lines of $8 to $10 million on DK Metcalf, and adding Nick Emenwari and Jalen Milroe to your roster. That's kind of the math right there. So it was aggressive. Dead cap is painful, but they've made some moves, and they could really set themselves up by making these moves rather than sort of hanging on, trying to see if Jamal Adams' hip and his knee is going to be okay, and his shoulders. Quandre Diggs is a good deep defender. And yeah, he's $20 million this year, but so they've really, more to my liking. And as well with their undrafted free agents, they've guaranteed more money this last year and this year than they've ever done before, which really isn't a really huge deal, but it's a strategy that they could come in. If they score in a couple of those undrafted free agent deals that they've made, persuading them to come over because there's more guaranteed money. That's like free money. It's just adding talent to your team without a whole lot of obligation. So yeah, there has been some changes with that, and as well as like Sam Darnold contract, they added a couple of void years. So basically, they had $4 million free extra dollars this year that they'll pay for at the end of the contract with Sam Darnold. They'll have $4 million next year. So grab a $4 million player on the roster that you see, like Josh Jones, Jaron Reed, maybe most of Ernest Jones' first year cap hit. They wouldn't be here. They wouldn't have afforded them if they didn't put in those void years. So They're a little bit more getting into speed with the rest of the NFL. They're not diving in with both feet like the Philly Eagles or the Saints are with their crazy cap constructions, but they're sort of getting more in touch with the reality of running a team financially in the NFL in this 21st century. And for one, I'm proud to see it, and I'm glad to see what they do next.
So it's more of they're not necessarily being the person that has a credit card and is very, very scared to use it. They're starting to get more in that habit of charging the credit card a little bit more on some of those expenditures there. So what we'll finish off here with, Curtis, is I know you go to training camp every year. You're one of the few people I know that's out there almost every training camp practice that's available to sit on the berm, and I'll probably be there joining you on August 1st this year. So Curtis, what are some of the areas that you're going to be really focused in camp? I know offensive line's probably already one that you'll mention, but outside of, say, the offensive line group and they're gelling, what are going to be some of the things you're going to be looking for and be interested in watching during those practices?
I would be very interested to see how the whole receiver group really lines up and how they practice in camp. And that includes the tight ends. I think there's going to be a number of factors there that could come into play with how they put their final 53 together. So the third wide receiver spot is going to be very fascinating. So Marvin Scanling, what he brings. They have a good idea of what he brings. But how do the other players fit in? The draft picks, Ricky White, Torrey Horton, how do they fit into this team? And can they actually have an impact in their rookie year? So I think it'd be very interesting to see how they come out, how they deploy them, seeing how some of the players are that we've had injury concerns with. I mean, Torrey Horton missed a bunch of time, but some of the video we were able to see from the OTAs and other things, it looked like he was practicing just fine. Arroyo looked pretty good from what we could see in some of the practices. So, will be interesting to see. I mean, do they really want to try to convert him to a tight end? Do they want to call him a big wide receiver and have him run some of the routes that he's good at, and maybe could be a little bit of DK Metcalf's filling that hole there? I think it'll be interesting to see how they use that. And then Nick Emenwari on defense. How are they going to put this together? They won't show us their tricks in training camp or even in the preseason. They won't show us that. But where's he lining up? So I see a lot of talk that he's been in the nickel spot in the early going, and then they've used him kind of like that Devin Witherspoon spot where he's a nickel, he's on the edge, but he could blitz at any moment, or he could drop back and he could cover into things. And how they use him will be fascinating, because like Devin Witherspoon last year, he was like 55% in that nickel slot spot, and the rest outside when they weren't using him in the crazy package situations. So where does Emenwari in the first year fit into that? So I'll be very interested to see how they put all that together. But the watchword on defense really is flexibility, variation, creating mismatches and disguising. And they have players all up and down the defensive roster that could do that. And Nick Emenwari just makes them even more dangerous that way. So I'll be very interested to see how that works out. And then I just want to see Uchenna Nwosu healthy. I want to see him line up and practice. I'd love him to see him busting things up and having a great camp, but just seeing him line up and feel good and get a good get off on plays would be really, really great to see, because I think that they really missed him when he went down, and we saw the difference between him and Boye Mafe on that side.
Yeah, no, those are definitely really good points, and definitely things I will be watching as well. The thing for me, I think that I'll be focusing on the most is I want to see how this offensive staff operates offensive sessions. What does the coaching look like? What does the team time look like? How different does this offense look, formation, play-wise? How do these quarterbacks adjust to it? As Sam Darnold, we heard he kind of was okay in minicamp. Does that get better that he's had some time off to go work on some of the stuff he knows that's going to be as a staple in this offense? I'm very interested as you in the receiving group. I'm also very interested in this linebacking group. And I know you can't see much because they don't generally hit a lot. But what does the depth look behind Ernest Jones and Tyrese Knight? And the other thing, too, that I will, even though I say they can't hit a lot, I think, and I'm hoping this is a bit more of a physical camp. If you're going to be a run-the-ball type team that they're saying they want to be in physical like that, I'll be very interested to see what those team periods look like. What does it look like when they finally get pads on and how much hitting is there? It'll be very interesting. But Curtis, you know what? I've had you here for basically an hour now on the HawksZone Rundown. So, Curtis, what do you have coming up? Where can people find your stuff? You know, give kind of a rundown to the listeners so they know where everything to find you is.
Sure. So Seahawks Draft Blog is where I write articles. I'm on Twitter, Curtis93969. And so what's coming up, I'll probably end up putting something in writing about the 2022 class that we've talked about, just so I like to have something on paper so I kind of able to look back and see what I predicted and what I said, how things are going to go. So I'll have some thoughts about that, and that comes up. And then whenever I go to training camp, I usually take notes and then do a write-up at the end of the day when I get home and submit that to be posted on the website. So you'll be able to read what I thought of the day, what I thought of the class, and so we'll see how that goes. And we're not able to video or take pictures anymore, so we'll see how that goes. You're gonna have to rely on my memory, so I'm gonna have to actually be like a reporter with a pencil and a pad of paper writing things down. So, but it'll be really fun to see what's going on. And I'm gonna say this right now before I forget. I'm gonna have to be committed to not getting too excited about Jalen Milroe. He's gonna blow the camp up. Everybody's gonna love him and think he's great, and his skills are gonna wow everybody in camp. But we just have to be patient with him and let him grow as a player and let him develop as a quarterback. You know, the footwork, the mechanics, decision making, all that. We know the arm's there, we know the legs are there. Let's just get the brain lined up, and then we've really got something. So will you be my sponsor and make sure I don't get too excited about Jalen Milroe and keep me in line from being overly excited?
Absolutely, Curtis. I will totally do that for you. And everyone, you can find Curtis's links to his things below in the description. Again, guys, don't forget, subscribe, click the like on this video, comment on the video. It helps the algorithm, helps us get out there more for everybody else. Curtis, thank you so much for your time. And for everyone else, go Hawks.
Anytime. Thanks, Bryce.